Welcome. Thank you, Meredith. And good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It looks like we have a good mix of people from with different types of businesses. I won't go through my introduction because Meredith already did that for me. But I just want to let you know that I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share some of my expertise with you today. So I just want to quickly go through the agenda. I'm going to start off by telling you about what market research is and why it's valuable to your company. Next, I'm going to walk you through some different types of market research. And then I'll share with you some examples of ways you can use market research for your own business. And finally, we'll have some time at the end for your questions. So what is market research? Well, according to entrepreneur.com, which I thought was a great source for this audience, market research is the process of gathering, analyzing, and interpreting information about a market, about a product or service to be offered for sale in that market, and about the past, present, and potential customers for the product or service. Research into the characteristics, spending habits, location, and needs of your business's target market, the industry as a whole, and the particular competitors you face. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, and let me promise you this will be the most text-heavy slide I'm going to share with you today. I really want to speak to you and share some examples, not just read a bunch of words. And why is market research important? I just want to stress the fact, from that definition, that market research is not just about your own product or service, but it's also understanding your competitors, understanding your current customers, and also understanding potential customers, and really understanding the industry you're in. The better you understand all of those, the better you will be at shaping the strategy and future of your own business. So moving on to different types of market research, at a high level, there's really two different types. The first is quantitative research. Quantitative market research really involves anything that can be measured and typically includes numbers. For example, if you conducted a survey and learned that 56% of your customers were women, that would be quantitative market research data. On the other hand, qualitative market research is typically more unstructured and more exploratory in nature. So an example of this would be if you asked a potential customer to express their feelings towards your brand. That would be qualitative market research data. So this begs the question, which type of research is better? The answer is both. It really just depends on your objective. In my line of work, I often start off with qualitative research to really explore the nature of an issue and really learn about the customer and what's going on. And then I'll follow it up with a quantitative research method to ask sort of more cut and dry questions. But as some examples, if you want to know if version A or version B of your product is most preferred by your customers, you want to conduct quantitative data and research, most likely in the form of a survey to make your decision. So if you learn that 80% of your customers preferred product A, that's probably the right direction for you to go. On the other hand, if you really want to understand how to improve your product, you might want to go with qualitative research. You could ask questions around, what they like about your product or what they dislike about your product, and you could listen and understand those answers and then process those and use that to make improvements to your product. Qualitative research really allows you to dig deeper and ask follow-up questions as well, based on sort of what people are saying. So they may say something that surprises you, or confuses you, but then you can ask a follow-up. With a survey, you may get answers, but you don't have the opportunity to follow up. So when should you be using market research? Really all of the time. There's always more that you can learn about your industry, your customers, and your competitors. Now, this doesn't mean that you must be constantly conducting market research studies, but you should always be listening and open to feedback. One example of ways I do this, I subscribe to many industry publications in the beer industry, and I like to keep tabs on the more popular beer sites and blogs. Not everything that comes into my email box or everything I'm looking at is relevant for my day-to-day work, but often, I'll pick up little nuggets here and there, and that will that will prompt me to explore things further. I hear about a new product offering from a competitor, and to understand it further, I do more research, which may then lead to more formal market research. Now, I realize that being owners of small businesses means you probably have limited or even no budget for market research. I'm sure you're not about to go out and hire, a market research person to work for you full time. Most likely, you're going to be conducting the market research yourself on a very limited budget. But that's okay, because I want to share with you some techniques you can use without spending very much money or even no money at all. The biggest thing these will all cost you is really your time. And I actually use many of these techniques myself. Not everything I'm exploring warrants, a big expensive study. Oftentimes it's more informal, and I learn a lot from that type of research. Within research, there's both primary and secondary research. Primary research is generally any research you conduct yourself or have someone else conduct for you, whereas secondary research is basically any third-party research. So some examples of secondary research are things like industry reports, trade journals, and independent surveys. On the one hand, primary research is tailored to your specific needs and addresses your objectives, whereas secondary research is often a bit more generic, because it might be exploring the whole industry. It might not be hitting on all the things that you're looking to understand. Although, honestly, I don't find secondary research as useful. A lot of secondary research sources are often free and easy to find, with some quick online searches or visiting, your local library. Just keep in mind, whenever you're using secondary research, to really pay attention to where that secondary research is coming from, making note of the source and making sure it's reputable. I think as everyone knows, not everything you find online or not everything you find on Wikipedia is necessarily the most up-to-date or accurate, so you have to take some of that with a grain of salt. But there are some good sources out there that can provide you with some valuable information about your industry. Another thing to keep in mind with secondary research, if it isn't free, if there are some industry reports that are going to cost you, a bit of money, sometimes these run anywhere from, something like $500 to up into the thousands of dollars. It's important to find out as much information about these sources, and even to get things like, to get a table of contents, really understand what's in there to make sure it's worth your investment. So let's dive deeper into some different types of research. The first thing I want to start off with, and what types of research I use extremely frequently, are surveys. I'm sure all of you have filled out surveys before, and sometimes surveys are fun and engaging, and other times they can be really long and tedious. One of the keys I find to getting good survey responses is to make sure the respondents who are taking your survey have at least some level of interest in your product or company. If you're making some sort of dairy product that you're trying to sell and you want feedback on, if your audience is lactose intolerant survey takers, that's not really going to give you much feedback you can do much with. One of my main rules when writing a survey is to make sure all of my questions are relevant to my objectives. For example, you might be curious what cities your customers live in, but if you won't be using that information for anything, then including a question about it in your survey is just going to make your survey unnecessarily longer. And the problem is, the longer your survey gets, you have a better chance of people dropping off and not completing your survey. So if you can keep people engaged and keep the questions relevant, you'll get better responses and response rates. But on the other hand, if you want to know where your customers live, that city, if that's important because you're trying to figure out locations to advertise in, then by all means include that in your survey. So who should take your survey? Definitely your customers or your potential customers. If you have a storefront, you already have access to your customers. You could ask them to take a survey. If not, you might have a newsletter, or you might have contact information from some of your online customers. When possible, it's always helpful to provide an incentive for people to take your survey. Give a reason to want to fill it out and give you feedback. However, this incentive doesn't have to be very expensive. Instead of offering the incentive to everyone who takes your survey, you could raffle off, for example, a gift card to your store. You could offer a free product that you sell to one lucky winner. This is much less costly, but it also gives people a reason to take your survey. Hopefully some people will do it from the good of their heart. They want to help your business. But keep in mind, if you're sending out this survey via email, people are getting tons of emails every day and being asked to take surveys and flooded with tons of things. So if you want to give them a reason and separate it from other emails and stuff that's coming into their inbox, that incentive and that raffle can really help out. I want to mention that surveys can be created very cheaply. In fact, SurveyMonkey offers a free basic subscription that gives you access to their online survey platform. And let me note, I have no affiliation with SurveyMonkey. I use them and I like their services, but there's plenty of other competitors that offer similar products. I'm just going to talk about SurveyMonkey for a minute because that's what I'm familiar with. But if you want to use them, great. If not, I know there's other companies out there like Zoomerang who offer competitive services. The free offering from SurveyMonkey doesn't include all of the survey features and bells and whistles like certain logic and question types. And it also caps the total number of questions that you can include in your survey at 10. But despite these limitations, it's really a great way to get started with surveys. So I've actually, I use SurveyMonkey. I also use, more expensive survey software for more complex surveys. But what I really like about SurveyMonkey is I've trained a lot of my colleagues how to use SurveyMonkey, and they've gone off, with a half-an-hour tutorial from me. They've gone off and actually created their own surveys on a regular basis. So it's really user-friendly. It's easy to set up with. It takes, you play around with it for a little bit of time, you can create pretty nice-looking surveys. When designing surveys, there are really two main types of questions you can ask. There's closed-ended questions. And those are the type of questions that offer choices to respondents. So usually a multiple choice question. You ask them the question, you provide them different choices, and they select the appropriate response. So for example, how often do you shop at a grocery store? You might provide responses like, every day, a couple times a week, once a week, a couple times a month, etc. Open-ended questions, on the other hand, let respondents fill in the answers. So it would have a question followed by like an open text box. So an example would be, tell me everything you like about this product. And then people can fill in their feelings. Closed-ended questions are much quicker to analyze and are really great if you know most or all of the answer choices you want to provide to your survey takers. Open-ended questions are great if you don't know how someone might respond to something or are looking for more detailed response. As a rule, open-ended questions take longer to answer and a little harder for respondents to answer. They have to do more thinking. They have to think about what they're going to write versus just clicking on a multiple choice question. So I try not to include more than a few open-ended questions in any of my surveys, unless it's absolutely necessary. But typically, if I'm finding myself putting together a survey and I have lots of open-ended questions, that probably means the survey is not the best approach. I might need to choose something like a focus group, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Another key to writing good survey questions is to make sure they provide actionable information. First, you really need to figure out what you're trying to understand and then design the questions to get you that information. So if you start by writing the questions, sometimes you get into the weeds or you start designing questions that aren't necessary. I always list out my objectives and then figure out how can I best get an answer to that question. And that's when I start writing the questions. For example, if you're concerned about how your product stacks up against specific competitors, you wouldn't want to ask an open-ended question like, which other cookies do you like better than mine? Instead, you want to ask how your cookies stack up to competitors X, Y, and Z. Whenever you can give the specific examples, it will give you richer information. Next, I want to talk about focus groups in interviews. Focus groups and consumer interviews are a really great way for learning about your customers and potential customers. Unlike with surveys, focus groups give you the opportunity to dive deeper into what people are saying. Unless you're administering a survey in person, you don't have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions. In focus groups and interviews, if someone says something that surprises you or you don't understand or that you want more information about, you can actually ask them to explain what they mean further. Now, looking at the screen, if you take a look at the picture on the left, I actually conduct a lot of focus groups that look like that. I go to a focus group facility in a certain city. I have people recruited to match exactly the customer spec I'm looking for. We sit around a table and we discuss different topics, or I show them different things I'm working on. It could be for new packaging, it could be a new product I want to taste, it could be a new advertisement. Well, those are great for talking to specific drinkers. Those types of focus groups are time-consuming and expensive. I also conduct plenty of informal focus groups that look more like the picture on the right. That's actually a picture of the Sam Adams Boston Brewery. I'm lucky enough to have access to hundreds of people who visit the brewery every day to go on tours. After they finish the brewery tour, I'll often find volunteers to participate in focus groups and discussions with me. And these are, like I said, to talk about things like new beers or new package designs or new advertising. It's really amazing to me for as little as a free pint glass or a keychain, or even just for another pint of beer. All people give me 30 minutes to up to an hour of their time, and oftentimes at the end of our discussion, they don't want to leave. They want to continue talking to me. People really love to give their opinions on topics and products that they have an interest in. So as long as you get the right people in the room, you can gather a lot of valuable information. So all of you being in the food and beverage space, you actually have the opportunity to provide free products for people to eat or drink while you conduct these informal focus groups. Those products might be what you want to spend your time talking about, so they can evaluate how much they like them or dislike them, or what they would change, or what it reminds them of. Or you can use that as an incentive to get them to talk about other aspects of your business or company. If you have a storefront, you can hold these groups right before or after you open or close your business for the day. Or you could hold them during slower times of the day if you have the bandwidth to do that while still running your business. If you don't have a storefront, you can still conduct these focus groups. You can do it with friends, you can do it with family. The key with that is just to find people you trust to give you honest feedback. I wouldn't bring your 75-year-old aunt into the focus group if she's only going to say she loves everything you're going to talk about and is not going to tell you things that she dislikes or concerns she has. So really, it's important to get that honest feedback. Sometimes it's easier to say, to tell them you're not going to be offended by what they say, or even tell them if they don't know you well, this is not your product, or it's not something you created yourself. So when I'm moderating focus groups, I tell them, if they give me good feedback or they give me negative feedback, I'm not going to get excited, I'm not going to get upset. So to feel free to share their honest and true feelings. In addition to getting feedback about your products or business during focus groups or interviews, you can also use this time to get feedback on your competitors. If you're worried about brand influence, they're going to choose your product because you're conducting this in your storefront and be biased towards it, you could disguise your competitors' products. I often do that with beer tastings. I'll tell them all of the products we're tasting are Sam Adams beer. We want to get your feedback on. They're just different brews we've made, or they're different trials or iterations. I don't do that to be dishonest, but I do that to take brand out of the consideration, because people have different opinions of brands, competitors a lot of times going into the discussion. So if you take that away, they can do a more honest apples to apples comparison. The key to running effective focus groups, or one of the keys, is to create a thoughtful list of questions, or what I like to call a discussion guide that you want to ask during your groups. If you think about those beforehand, and I like to type them out. I have them in front of me, and then I can read through them and make sure I'm hitting on all the questions I want to ask. But it's also important to listen to what people are saying and ask follow-up questions as necessary. Don't be so tied to your set list of questions that you have to follow question after question and miss something important someone might say that might warrant further conversation. And my goal of focus groups is always to really keep it as conversational as possible, pay attention to people, and let them know that you're hearing what they have to say. You don't necessarily have to reflect if it's a good or bad comment, but making eye contact, nodding, follow-up questions will let people know that you really are truly interested in what they have to say. If you have the ability and you want to take notes at the same time, that can work. And another thing you could do is potentially record the session so you can go back and listen to them or watch them after. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you could have someone else in the room helping you out, maybe taking notes. So you don't have to sit there with your head down and a piece of paper taking notes while you're trying to also listen and follow up with people. Another important market research technique is competitor analysis. I'm sure it goes without saying that understanding your competition is vitally important to a successful business. But there are actually some relatively simple ways to keep tabs on your competitors. You know, if you're in the prepackaged food and beverage space, you need to understand what the competition looks like in the sales channel that are relevant to you. So for example, if you're a cookie manufacturer and you want to sell to Whole Foods, you should be visiting local Whole Foods and seeing what cookies are currently, what cookies and competitor products they're currently carrying, including how much they cost, the packaging size, the formats, how many different brands they carry, et cetera. Because you may learn, for example, you know, they have 50 chocolate chip cookies on the shelf, but they only have 2 oatmeal raisin cookies. You may make both those products, but knowing there's less competition from oatmeal raisin, maybe that's what you want to lead with when you're trying to sell it into, you know, the decision maker for that store. You can also spend some time in the store observing how people shop the cookie section. You know, I'm not necessarily saying you need to sit in the store and hang out in the aisle for hours, but if you pretend to shop the aisle and unobtrusively observe people for a little while, you know, without it being too awkward. I've done that plenty of times, both with store permission and without. You know, there's plenty of people coming in and out of the store, so it's easy enough to spend some time in there. On the other hand, if you have a storefront and you're competing against other stores, you should understand what your competitors are offering in their stores. If you don't feel comfortable visiting your competition, you could always send friends or family to visit those stores for you. You know, collecting information on their product offerings, pricing, customers, et cetera, can be very useful in shaping the strategy for your own store and products. You should also understand what kind of online presence your customers have. You know, what messaging are they conveying on their websites and social media sites? What product benefits are they playing up? You know, what is their pricing? Following your competitors these days on social media is pretty easy, and you can also subscribe to newsletters, and it's a real easy way to keep tabs and keep up to date with what your competitors are doing. You know, I know in my line of work, I regularly follow all of our key competitors, and I know that they follow us. You know, we can actually see many of our competitors following us on social media, subscribing to our newsletters. You know, if you're concerned about your competitors, if you're in a smaller industry, you're concerned about them finding out, you know, you can always set up a new email account just for gathering competitive intelligence, you know, or you can have, you know, friends or family follow them for you and relay that information to you. You know, they can easily forward what they're seeing onto you. And lastly, the last topic I want to touch on today is customer feedback. You know, it's important to continuously collect customer feedback. Here at Boston Beer, you know, we have a couple of customer service representatives who sort through all the emails and phone calls we get and address any customer concerns. Keep in mind, a lot of the feedback you'll get tends to be at either end of the spectrum. We get, you know, a lot of complaints if there's anything wrong with the product, they just don't like something, and then we get a lot of praise. People really like something, want to thank us for something. You know, saw something that we did that they liked. You get a lot less of the sort of in the middle feedback. So, you know, if you're seeing a lot of complaints, you know, and then you're seeing a lot of praise, you know, that's probably pretty normal. And how to collect customer feedback, this can be done through many of the previous techniques we talked about. Certainly surveys are a good way to collect customer feedback, as well as focus groups is another great tool to understand how people feel about your product or service or business. You know, you could always have an old school suggestion box, or it's easy enough to have an email address set up that people can use to provide customer feedback. You know, the important thing is to address any concerns in a timely manner. You know, even if it's just replying and saying we're looking into this. You may not have an answer right away, but people know that you're paying attention and you are looking into it. They'll feel a lot better about your product or brand. And the important thing with customer feedback is that it's done on a continuous basis, because things can change very quickly. Just because you get great feedback one month doesn't mean you're going to continue to get great feedback the next month. I hope you do, but you know, things change all the time. There may be quality control issues. You might have tweaked a recipe slightly. You might be sourcing ingredients from a different supplier that slightly changes your product. So there's all these little things that can go on. And even there may be things outside of your control. It could be the way one of your retail partners is merchandising your product, or there may be some you know, tactics your competitors are using against you that are not so nice, that you can learn about from the sort of customer feedback loop. So as much as you can keep that feedback loop open is really important. So you can listen to what's happening, you know, in the industry and with your competitors and with your own products, and get that customer feedback. So I want to thank you all for listening. This was actually my first ever webinar. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And now I want to open up the discussion to any questions you may have.
Thanks so much, Scott. This has been really informative. I certainly don't know nearly much about market research, so I've learned a lot already. So folks, if you want to go ahead and start typing your questions into the chat box there, I'll be happy to read them to Scott, and I will go ahead and get us started with some questions about really sort of choosing your focus group. If you think, Scott, that there's any use in, instead of using folks who might come in to your store or folks who are on your mailing list, are there situations where it is really helpful to sort of handpick the folks in the interview group, or is it pretty much a rule across the board that it's best to use sort of an open-ended approach to get a cross-section of opinions?
No, if you have the opportunity to handpick them, that's great. You know, oftentimes when I'm doing focus groups, I might do one with sort of our loyal drinkers, then I might actually do another group with sort of more of an opportunity target, so sort of our potential customers. You know, they might be aware of our brand but not drinking it. And then, you know, oftentimes I like to conduct a focus group with people who drink a competitive brand and understand, you know, one of our key competitors, understand what's so appealing about the brand, why they drink that, you know, how they first learned about it, you know, and see if there's an opportunity to gain some business from the competitor, you know, and learn a bit more about the tactics that they're currently doing and using.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks. So we've had another question about how many people should be included in your feedback. Do you have a sense of like the overall number of people that you would consider a high enough number to validate the amount of feedback? Like if you get 100 or more people, then that's probably a good opinion to act on, or a certain kind of a benchmark there?
So it depends on the type of research. For quantitative research, I like to have a minimum of 50 people.
Okay.
To have sort of a valid sample size. Ideally, you know, more like 80 to 100 if I can. And that's assuming I don't need to look at subgroups. So if I want to look at differences between males and females, then I want, you know, that 50 plus of each of those groups.
Okay.
And then on the qualitative side, for something like focus groups, you know, I typically like to conduct groups with about 6 people or less, but usually I'm conducting multiple groups, so altogether I may have 20 to 30 people, and then depending on, you know, in my business, there's a lot of different regional brands and different drinking preferences across regions. So a lot of times we might do a group in Chicago and a group in LA. So with that West Coast read and more of the Middle America read on whatever we're testing. You know, it's important to keep in mind that qualitative research, you're not looking for a certain number. You're not. It's important not to turn that into quantitative research, you know, to say, all right, 6 out of 10 people said this, so we should definitely do this. It's informative to then use that information and help you make a decision, but it may not it may not necessarily be representative of all of your customers or all of your target.
Okay. And relatedly, is there a sort of a process that you would recommend around incorporating customer feedback when you want to make changes to your product based on it? So like if you do a focus group or you do a survey and you get some advice to change your product in a certain way, how much of that changed product would you say you should produce in order to see if it really does work in the market? Do you have a sense of how that process might work for sort of a small business that's been in business for just a couple of years?
Mm-hmm. So, if you're seeing, from several focus groups, there's a desire to make changes to your product, or I think things should be changed. I might, if you can do it, I'd follow it up with a survey to see if, it's just those 6 or 8 people, or if it really is representative. If you get 50 or 80 people to take a survey, and then make the changes you feel appropriate. But I would then want to test the new product with the changes before you actually took it to market, unless you're supremely confident you've addressed all the concerns, because sometimes you might make changes to address one concern but create another concern.
Okay. So like take it back to a focus group with the changes first before putting it on shelves?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
And we do that all the time. I mean, we launched a product a couple of years ago, and after about 6 months, it was doing okay in the market, but it wasn't selling. It wasn't quite as successful as we had hoped, and we were losing out to one of the other main competitors. And we actually went back and did sensory taste test evaluations and made some minor tweaks to the product, and then changed the formula and saw a lot more success after making the changes.
Okay.
So we tested the new formula versus the old formula to make sure we had made improvements, and it was worthwhile to bring that to market.
Okay. Another question we've got here is about the cost of focus groups. If you pay for a focus group, how much are we talking? Is that a kind of investment that might be worthwhile for folks?
Sure. So it's roughly about $6,000 to conduct probably, I'd say, about 3 focus groups, with 6 to 8 people each. And that includes costs from renting the facility, having the facility recruit the respondents for you, the incentive for the respondents usually get paid anywhere from like $50 to $150, depending on the time commitment. And that also includes sort of their professional service fees and any food that's provided to the respondents. If you're doing groups around meal times, important to keep people fed and happy, so they're happier to participate.
Okay, but if you were to sort of administer your own just with customers right after you close up shop for the day, then obviously your cost would be much lower than using a formal focus group research firm, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could decide on the incentive that is appropriate for you. I mean, like I said, in my case, I can do it with a pint of beer and maybe a glass giveaway.
Right.
So it depends on how interested your customers are in helping out. But if you have a free, if you have a food or beverage product, you can offer them. And if you tell people, honestly, you tell them it's in the name of research, and you want help improving your product or evaluating your product, people enjoy that. I mean, as long as you're not putting something in front of them that is sort of half-baked per se, and you're not, it may not be very good. If you're confident it's a pretty good product, people do like to taste things and sort of be guinea pigs and help out.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question we've got is about researching flavors. So if you haven't produced your product line yet and you're interested in doing some research or sorting out what the most popular flavors for your product would be before you're in production, and there's not a big budget for things like a focus group research firm, what do you think the best way to kind of analyze the market and see what the popular flavors would be?
So what we do is we do a fair amount of concept testing. So we test things before they're fully developed, before we have to bring in R&D and operations and finance and get a lot of people involved, and we test out. Sometimes it's just written concepts. You could test out, a description of your product with the different flavors. If you have an audience, you can survey, who you think could be your target consumers. You could see which of those flavors is most appealing to them. Another thing you can do is look at what flavors are popular in a similar category. So, for example, we launched a product called Truly Spiked and Sparkling last year, which is a hard sparkling water. So think like basically an alcoholic fruit-flavored seltzer. So we spent a lot of time analyzing the non-alcoholic seltzer and sparkling water market to see what flavors were successful there to help us inform our decisions. Since it's such a new category, there wasn't really much to look at within our existing category to see what was popular.
Okay. And if there's a survey that might be an option with that, how would you go about that? How would you maybe find folks to take the survey about the flavor popularity?
I don't use it too often, but you could use Google Survey. Google has if you type in Google Survey, they actually have a survey feature, which is pretty easy to program, and you can survey sort of the general population and get feedback on different topics. Okay. There are some limitations to it, and I don't think you can screen out certain people. So when I create surveys, for example, if I want to talk to men, 21 to 29 who drink craft beer, I'll ask questions along the way. What is your gender? Which of these alcoholic beverages do you drink? How old are you? And if they don't meet certain requirements, they get terminated from the survey. Google, I don't think, has those termination points, but as long as you include the questions you need to filter out to the right respondents, you can use something like a Google survey pretty cheaply to get feedback on things like flavors for your product.
Okay. And then we have another question around some resource ideas, if you might be able to point some folks in the direction of resources around demographics. We've got somebody in the webinar today in actually the neighborhood I used to live in Brooklyn, and is interested in opening a cafe there and wanting to understand kind of what the demographics are in a certain neighborhood. And so do you have any resources that you like to use or that you've heard are really good around finding things like age, average income, like household information, demographic data by neighborhood?
That's not something I really too familiar with. I mean, there is sort of all of the the census information online at census.gov. I don't know how granular it gets on the neighborhood level. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably not the best source for that. You could certainly spend some time observing who's walking around the neighborhood. I know that's not the easiest solution. The other thing I might suggest is maybe talking to a few local businesses in the neighborhood you're looking at, maybe probably non-competing businesses, and ask, about their types of customers and even where they got some of their information. I would think as long as you're not trying to compete with them, they would be, someone in sort of a similar, who is still some similar problems, may be willing to help out.
Yeah.
Plus, if you're going to run a successful business, you're probably going to add value to the neighborhood, hopefully bring more people in, and there might be, you might have some shared customers who populate both businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great idea. And I imagine there might be city data, like New York City might gather information on that might be publicly available, and I'm sure other cities kind of have a similar thing, as well as the census data that you mentioned. Let's see. All right, I think we got time for maybe a couple more questions. One that we have here is, Scott, do you gather any quantitative research from bars in particular, in terms of like what would be most valuable if you're trying to get more taps in a bar or get into a bar at all? What quantitative pieces might they want to see? Do you do any of that?
So the on-premise sector, which is on-premise, is really anywhere you consume products at. So a bar, restaurant, anywhere you're buying a beer and drinking it there, as opposed to like a store. The on-premise sales data is not great. The problem is everyone uses very different POS and ordering systems. So no one supplier has really aggregated all that for on the off-premise side. So all the store data is aggregated by two companies, IRI and Nielsen. You can get really good data, for a fee on all of those on all of those different channels like convenience store, grocery. Convenience store, grocery, club stores. On the on-premise side, it's still coming together. There is some data on like bartenders and how they recommend beers and what they're seeing as popular, but it's not as reliable as the off-premise data.
Okay, so that might be a place where it would be more sort of community-based or even qualitative, as opposed to here's this body of information that tells me exactly what I want to know about all of the bars in my city.
Yeah, some of that may be honestly going into the bars and, sort of hand selling and understanding, from the key decision maker, what's selling, what are they looking for, getting as much information from them before you make your sales pitch, especially if you have multiple offerings. If you go in there and you start off by trying to sell your IPA and they say they have 10 IPAs on draft already, that may lead to not much success. But if you understand they're looking for something lighter and easier drinking, maybe you have a Pilsner that would appeal to them, and you can lead with that and connect with them. I mean, I know our salespeople always try and understand, the motivations from our retail partners, and really partner with them and be collaborative versus just try to sell something to them. We want to help them be successful and help their business because that's going to help us ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and I think this is going to have to be our last question. We just have a few minutes left here. We've got someone who's wondering about how to research distribution networks. I'm not sure how much Sam does this, but just trying to, if there's any resources that are available that folks can learn about which distributor goes to a certain location, or just kind of growth in general. Is there certain tracks or even certain questions that you ask when thinking about growing into a new market? Anything that you look into with that?
Unfortunately, that's really outside my expertise. I'm not dealing with really any of our distributors.
Okay.
The only once in a while I'll meet with distributors if I'm out visiting markets with salespeople. But when I'm talking with them, it's just trying to understand what's selling in their market, how our products could be more successful, what's working, what's not. It's not about that sort of. It's not about choosing a distributor or how they can help us or what areas they service.
Okay. Yeah.
So unfortunately, it's not something I have much experience with.
That's okay. You have provided a wealth of information today, so I really appreciate your time, Scott. And everyone, thanks for hanging with us for the full hour. I've personally really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you all have as well. We are recording right now this webinar, so I will be sending out an email just in a few minutes here with the recording, so you can refer back to this information in the future if you'd like. And that email will also include just a quick survey, just like Scott talked about, very quick, not very many questions, straight and to the point. So you can let us know what you thought about today's webinar so we can make them better for you in the future. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you again to Scott and everyone at Sam Adams who supports Accion's program with our food and beverage entrepreneurs. And we will see you at our next webinar coming in a couple months.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.